Good morning everyone. Today let us discuss about the ligaments which are related with the atlantoaxial bones. Now here you have a ligament, that is a transverse ligament running from right and left lateral masses of the atlas medially. Now let us have a look at the atlas. Here you have the small anterior arch, a large posterior arch, and the two lateral masses here with an facet for articulating in the occipital condyle and two transverse foramen in the transverse process. Now just behind the anterior arch you have the odontoid process of the axis. So it forms a pivot joint. So this the anterior arch of the atlas, the odontoid process is it's embraced with the transverse ligament which is running transversely just behind the odontoid process of the axis. Look at this view. You have both bones, that is the atlas above and the axis below. You can see the body of the body of the axis here. The odontoid process is seen here, and you can also make out two more ligaments, that is the apical ligament running from the apex of the dens and alar ligament running from the both sides of the surfaces of the sides of the odontoid process. You can also make out the transverse ligament here. Now before going to this view, let us orient ourselves with this view, because here this is an anterior view. Okay, the anterior view, the anterior arch of the atlas is cut here. See, can you see? So if you cut the anterior arch of the atlas, the odontoid process is exposed. You can see the odontoid process in the center. Now the apical ligament is seen arising from the apex of the odontoid process and going up and getting inserted to the anterior margin of the foramen magnum. So this is a foramen magnum. So here is the occipital bone, here is the foramen magnum. Similarly, the alar ligament, like a wing, starts from either side of the denticular the dens and goes and attached to the lateral margin of the occipital bone. See, like this, a wing. And finally, you can also make out a little bit of the transverse ligament behind the odontoid process. See, the yellow one is the transverse process which is seen behind the odontoid process. We can very well make out on the left side picture. Now you have covered three ligaments. As you can see on the left side, you have covered three ligaments. That is, one is a transverse ligament, other is the apical ligament, and third is the alar ligament. Now in the next picture, we will have a look at the transverse ligament in detail. So this ligament, again, I am calling your attention back to the transverse ligament. You are now aware about the view. You are very clear about the view now. So we just focus on the transverse ligament. Now let's go to the picture on the right side. This picture on the right side is actually a picture where this is actually a sagittal it's actually a coronal section. Can you see this? It's cut here, and you are viewing from posterior view. Okay, we are viewing from behind. Okay, so we are viewing from behind. This part is cut. The posterior arch is cut here. The posterior arch of atlas is cut here, and the spinous process of the axis is also cut. So we can have a look from behind, and we can see so this is the body of the second of the axis, and you can see the posterior part of the body looking from behind. So that's the orientation of the picture. Now let us have a look again at the transverse ligament. This transverse ligament has an ascending and a descending band. So what happens when there is an ascending and descending band? It becomes like a cross or a cruciform ligament. We can say it like a cruciate ligament. So there is a cruciate ligament here, which is nothing but an extension, up and down extension of the transverse band. You can also make out the alar ligament, while the apical ligament is being covered by the ascending band. So that is again, we haven't added any more ligaments here. We are still with the cruciate ligament, alar ligament, and apical ligament. Now let's go to the next slide. This is a sagittal section. So let us orient ourselves first. So here is the anterior part. This is the posterior part. Okay. So in the anterior part, we have the body. All right. This is the body of the third vertebra, cervical vertebra. This is the body of the axis, that is second cervical vertebra, and this is the odontoid process. And as you know, atlas do not have a body. Instead, it has an arch. So here you have the anterior arch of the atlas. So just behind the anterior arch, you have the odontoid process of the axis. Just behind the odontoid process of the axis, you have the transverse ligament. So this is a transverse ligament, as you have studied in the first slide. Now, as you go backwards, you can see the posterior arch of the atlas, which is cut here. Okay. Similarly, you have the lamella of the second of the atlas, of the axis. Okay, that is also cut here. This is the lamella of the third vertebra. So now let us again study this from anterior to posterior. So in front you have an anterior longitudinal ligament. Can you see? In front of the body of the vertebra, the ligament is called anterior longitudinal ligament. So the anterior longitudinal ligament is going up. I hope you can see my the marking. Now this anterior longitudinal, when it reaches the atlas to the axis, this is called anterior atlantoaxial joint. While it runs from the atlas to the occipital bone, we call it anterior atlanto-occipital membrane. So the ligament is the same, it's only changing its name because of the atlas and axis and the occipital have its own name. So it is just changing the name. That is how we should understand this. So let's go behind the body. So behind the body, the ligament is called posterior longitudinal ligament. Similarly, it is going up. Okay, there's here, hopefully, fortunately, there is no name change. Instead, when it reaches the atlas and goes to the occipital bone, this ligament is called as the tectorial membrane. So this is a tectorial membrane. Now you can also make out the few more ligaments which are already studied. The apical ligament at the tip of the dens going up. Behind the dens you have the transverse ligament. Okay, these two ligaments we already studied. Just to recap. Now let us go to the arch of the atlas. So this is a posterior arch of the atlas. This is the lamella of the axis, and this is the lamina of the third cervical vertebra. Can you see a ligament running from the lamina to the lamina above? So this is called the ligamentum flavum. Okay, this ligamentum flavum will be named as posterior atlantoaxial ligament, which is running from C2 to C1. But from atlas to occipital bone, it will be called as a posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. So only thing you have to understand, the ligamentum flavum from occipital to the atlas will be called as posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Okay, that is important. Atlanto-occipital membrane posterior. It's a ligamentum flavum named differently because it is running from atlas to occipital bone. So it's called atlanto-occipital. Now next two pictures which you will be seeing will be a view from anterior and a view from posterior. Now let's look at this. This is an anterior view. Here you can make out the anterior arch of the atlas. You can see the occipital bone, and you can see the anterior atlanto-occipital membrane, and the anterior longitudinal ligament can also be seen here. See, this is the anterior longitudinal ligament. We already seen it in the sagittal section. Now let us have a look. This is the posterior view. Here similarly you have the arch of the atlas, you have the lamella of the axis, lamella of the third. So this is the ligamentum flavum. The ligamentum flavum running from C3 to C2, and the ligamentum flavum running from the vertebra from axis to atlas and atlas to occipital will be called as the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane, which when you dissect we will see that this is the floor, forms the floor of the suboccipital triangle. Posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Alright. Now this picture looks complicated, but I think we can, after discussing this much, we can demystify this picture. What you see in the pink color is the bone. So here is the second C2, that is the axis. Here is C1, that is atlas. You can see the posterior arch of the atlas. Foramen transversum can be appreciated. The spinous process of C2. So Now understand this pink color is bone and the blue color is ligament. So let's start from the apical ligament. So you have the apical ligament at the tip of the, so this is the dens, okay, the bony part, dens, typical apical ligament from the apex of the dens. Now alar ligament from either side of either surface of the dens. So these are the alar ligaments going either side. You can see the cruciform ligament, which contains the transverse and apical and the ascending and descending bands. So it's a cruciate ligament is seen. Just behind it, you have the posterior longitudinal ligament. That is the ligament which is running behind the body. Okay, so which is called as a tectorial membrane, which will be adherent to the transverse ligament. So that is the posterior longitudinal ligament. Further behind, you have the ligament running from the lamella of the C3, C2 to C1, that is the ligamentum flavum. Okay, the ligamentum flavum between the atlas and occipital is known as the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Okay, that is a posterior atlanto-occipital membrane, which you already seen in the previous picture. Now to wind up, this is a nuchal ligament between the spinous processes, and this is the intertransverse ligament between the transverse processes. So that is all about the